I was on the chapel floor, bleeding from my knees, blind and voiceless, crawling towards the image I had desecrated 3 weeks prior. It was the early morning of December 12th, and what happened in that moment changed not only my life, but my understanding of everything I thought I knew about faith, about God, and about myself. When I touched the feet of that image of the Virgin Mary and whispered forgiveness with the last breath I had left, she wept, but this time the tears were clear water, not blood, like in my nightmares. And I woke up 3 days later in the hospital, cured of a blindness that doctors couldn't explain, but carrying a transformation I could never have imagined. My name is Elias Hernandez, and for 15 years I was a pastor of an evangelical church in the small town of St. Michael's in rural Texas. It was a community of only 3,000 inhabitants where Catholic traditions ran in people's veins like the sap of the century-old oaks that shaded the town square. But I saw it completely differently. To me, all that devotion was pure idolatry, a deception that distanced people from the true God, and my biggest target, my obsession, was the veneration of the Virgin Mary. I grew up in an evangelical family in Austin, Texas. My father was a strict preacher, a man who saw the world divided between light and darkness, with no middle ground. From a young age, I learned that Catholic images were idols, that praying to saints was a sin, and that the Virgin Mary, while respectable, was nothing more than a common woman whom God used to bring Jesus into the world. Nothing more than that. At 22, I felt the call to ministry and dedicated my life to preaching this truth as I believed it to be. When I arrived in St. Michael's, I found a deeply Catholic community. The small chapel in the center of town was the heart of the community. There, an image of the Virgin Mary received the daily prayers of almost all the residents. Candles were lit, flowers were offered, people knelt and wept before that figure in a starred blue mantle. To me, it was revolting. How could they be so blind? How could they not see that they were worshiping a painted piece of plaster? I rented a small hall in the newer part of town and started my church. In the beginning, it was just me and my wife, Carmen. She was always a wise woman, more cautious than I, but faithful to what we believed to be biblical truth. Gradually, some families began to attend our services. I preached with fervor, with a passion that ignited my voice and made the walls of the small hall tremble. And my favorite topic, the one that attracted the most attention, was the critique of Catholic idolatry. "You worship silent images," I would shout from the makeshift pulpit. "You spend money on candles for pieces of plaster that can't hear your prayers. The only mediator between God and man is Jesus Christ." With each service, I saw some people nod in agreement. Some even cried, as if they had finally understood a truth that had been hidden from them their lives. In 2 years, my congregation grew to 50 people. In 5 years, we were almost 200. I felt like an instrument of God, a spiritual liberator. I saw my success as a sign of divine approval. Pride began to creep into my heart like a weed, but I mistook it for holy zeal. Carmen tried to warn me, "Elias, be kinder. These people grew up with these traditions. You don't need to attack so much." But I thought she was being weak, condescending to error. My obsession with the Virgin Mary intensified when I discovered the strength that devotion had over the community. Even people who attended my church still lit candles in the chapel. I discovered that many hid images of the Virgin at home, praying in secret. This made me furious. As a pastor, I felt I was failing in my mission to purify the faith of those people. That's when I started preaching directly against the Virgin Mary, not just against idolatry in general, but specifically against her. "This supposed apparition," I said, "is nothing more than a legend created by the colonists to control the Native Americans. The real Mary would never appear to promote idolatry. I would even imitate people praying the rosary, mocking the gestures, making my congregation laugh. Hail Mary, full of grace, give me money in the town square." I would jeer, and the laughter would echo through the hall. Hatred grew inside me like a tumor. I couldn't pass the chapel without feeling a tightness in my chest, a mixture of anger and contempt. That image represented everything I considered wrong in faith. It was as if it were a personal affront to my mission. My wife began to distance herself. "Elias, "You're not the man I married," she told me one night. "You're full of hatred. That's not from God." But I wouldn't listen. I was convinced that I was a warrior of faith, a modern prophet fighting idolatry. I planned entire sermons dedicated to exposing what I called the Marian lie. I created dramatic illustrations, sometimes taking Catholic images I bought from religious goods stores to the pulpit, only to break them before the congregation as a symbol of breaking spiritual chains. I remember the day I crossed the line. It was a Friday night, at the end of November. I had preached a particularly virulent sermon against Marian idolatry. Arriving home, I couldn't sleep. I felt a strange restlessness, as if something were inciting me to act. Carmen slept beside me, and I watched her peaceful face, wondering why she didn't share my sacred indignation. Around 2 a.m., I got up and walked to the window. From there I could see the chapel in the center of town, softly illuminated by the moonlight. At that moment, I had an idea that seemed to come straight from hell, though I mistook it for divine inspiration. If that image was so powerful, if people truly believed it held some power, why didn't it react when challenged? I dressed silently and left the house. The streets were deserted, only a few stray dogs watching me curiously. I walked towards the chapel as if guided by an invisible force. The door was unlocked, as it always was in that quiet town, where no one feared thieves. I pushed it slowly and entered. The interior was plunged into shadows, only moonlight filtering through the small, stained glass windows. On the altar, the image of the Virgin Mary watched me with those serene eyes that always deeply irritated me. I approached it, feeling my heart accelerate. "So you're that powerful, are you?" I murmured, my voice echoing in the sacred silence. "Show your power, if it exists." What I did at that moment shames me to this day. I can't talk about it without feeling nauseous, but I need to tell you so you understand the depth of my fall and the magnitude of the grace that reached me. I urinated on the image. Yes, I profaned that figure, which represented so much hope for thousands of people, in that grotesque way, and I didn't stop there. I spat on it, angrily hit its face, screaming, "Where's your power now? Why don't you strike me down if I'm so blasphemous?" I left the chapel laughing, feeling like David after defeating Goliath. I thought I had proven something, that I had demonstrated the impotence of that false goddess. I went home and slept soundly, for the first time in weeks, but when I woke up the next morning, something was different. My eyes burned. It wasn't a common irritation, but a deep burning, as if someone had poured acid under my eyelids. When I got up and went to the bathroom, the mirror showed me something terrifying. My eyes were red, not just irritated, but bleeding. Tears of blood streamed down my face. Carmen woke up to my cries of despair. "Oh my God, Elias, what happened?" She immediately took me to the small town health clinic. The doctor, Dr. Ramirez, was perplexed. He had never seen anything like it. He examined my eyes with all the equipment he had, asking if I had been in any accident, if I had come into contact with any chemicals. I lied, said I didn't know anything. If you've been following our reports here on the channel, you know that experiences like this are not coincidences. They are signs, calls for a profound transformation. If this story is touching your heart, subscribe now to continue receiving testimonies that can change your perspective on faith, forgiveness, and miracles. You won't want to miss what's still to come on this journey. Dr. Ramirez prescribed eye drops and anti-inflammatories, but nothing worked. All that week, I woke up with bleeding eyes. Worse still, I started having disturbing dreams. Every night, I saw a woman in a star-studded blue robe walking towards me. Her eyes wept blood, and she spoke in a language I didn't understand, but which somehow burned in my soul like a branding iron. At first, I tried to rationalize. "It's guilt," I told myself. "I'm feeling guilty about entering the chapel without permission." But deep down, I knew something supernatural was happening. The woman in the dreams didn't seem like a product of my imagination. She was too real, too intense. And whenever I tried to preach against idolatry in the following services, My voice failed, literally. The words simply wouldn't come out. In the second week, my congregation began to notice that something was wrong. My eyes remained red and watery, my voice was hoarse, and I had completely lost the ability to attack Catholicism. Whenever I tried to talk about idolatry, I felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing my throat. People started whispering, asking questions I couldn't answer. But the most frightening thing came in the third week. Strange things started happening in the church itself. During a service, one of the women in the congregation, Mrs. Hope, began to scream and point to the mirror we had on the side wall. "She's there! She's there!" she cried in despair. When we all looked, we saw nothing but our own reflection. But Mrs. Hope insisted that there was a fiery female figure in the mirror, looking directly at me. In the following service, an 8-year-old child, the daughter of one of the deacons, began to speak in a strange language during prayer. It wasn't glossolalia, the gift of tongues we knew. It was something different, a structured language that none of us recognized. We later discovered it was Nahuatl, the ancient Aztec language. But how could a modern child know Nahuatl? The apparitions intensified. People reported seeing burns in the shape of a woman on the church walls. Others said they heard whispers in unknown languages during the early morning hours. One of the faithful brought a photograph she had taken during a service, and when she developed it, there was a translucent figure in a blue robe right behind me on the pulpit. My congregation began to disperse. People were afraid. Some returned to the Catholic Church. Others simply stopped attending any church. I was losing everything I had built in 15 years of ministry, but I couldn't understand why. My wife Carmen left me in the 4th week. "Elias, there's something dark about you," she said, packing her bags. "I don't know what you did, but I fear for my safety beside you." I was alone, completely alone. The church was empty. My wife had left. My vision was worsening, and the nightmares intensified. The woman in the blue cloak now not only spoke to me, but touched me. I felt her cold hands on my face, heard her voice whispering words. My mind didn't understand, but my spirit recognized as condemnation. That's when Joseph Mendoza sought me out. Joseph was a 60-year-old man, a devout Catholic, the only one in town who had never even visited my church. I always saw him in the square, praying his rosary every afternoon, and I used to look at him with disdain, seeing him as a symbol of the religious ignorance I fought against. But that Thursday afternoon, he knocked on my door. "Pastor Elias," he said, taking off his hat, "I need to talk to you." His voice was gentle, but charged with a seriousness that made me shudder. I invited him in, more out of curiosity than politeness. He sat in the living room, and took an old rosary and a yellowed photograph from his pocket. "I know what you did in the chapel," he said, looking directly into my red, tear-filled eyes. My blood ran cold. How could he know? "And I also know who you really are." He showed me the picture. It was of an indigenous man, in traditional attire, with features vaguely reminiscent of my own face. "This is Tlacaelel Hernandez," Joseph continued. "Your great-great-grandfather. He was an Aztec warrior who in 1531 tried to destroy the original tilma of the Virgin when she appeared to Juan Diego. The Hernandez family carries a special lineage, Pastor. Every 3 generations, a descendant is called to confront the same challenge that Tlacaelel faced." I looked at him incredulously. "What are you saying, you old fool?" But my voice came out trembling, because deep down, something resonated as truth. Joseph smiled sadly. "Tlacaelel had hatred in his heart, just like you. He saw the faith of others as weakness, as superstition. But when he tried to destroy the sacred image, he discovered that there were forces greater than his understanding. He spent the rest of his life trying to redeem himself. That's legend folklore." I tried to argue, but my voice was getting weaker. "Your great-grandmother Elena was the second," Joseph continued. ignoring my objection. She became a fervent evangelist, attacking Marian devotion in the early 20th century. She died blind and mute at 40, after years of inexplicable suffering. Your father, Thomas, was the third. Do you remember how he ended? I remember. My father had lost his voice in his final years, a paralysis of the vocal cords that no doctor could explain. He could no longer preach, spending the last 5 years of his life in total silence. And now it's your turn, Pastor Elias. The fourth generation, the last of the lineage. Joseph stood up, placing the rosary on the table. The Virgin isn't punishing you. She's offering an opportunity to break the cycle of hatred that began almost 500 years ago. He walked to the door, but before leaving, he turned to me one last time. December 12th is coming, Pastor. It's her day. If you want to break this curse that weighs on your family, you know what you need to do. After Joseph left, I sat in the empty living room, holding that old rosary and looking at the picture of my great-great-grandfather. The bloody tears flowed again, but this time they weren't just physical. Something inside me was breaking, a barrier of pride and hatred that I had built over decades. That night, the dream was different. The woman in the blue cloak didn't speak in Nahuatl. She spoke in Spanish, with a voice that was both maternal and firm. Hijo mío, el odio que cargas no es tuyo, es de generaciones pasadas, pero el perdón que necesitas es tuyo para elicas. I woke up knowing what it meant. My son, the hatred you carry is not yours. It is from past generations, but the forgiveness you need, that is yours to choose. In the following days, my condition worsened dramatically. I completely lost my sight. My voice was almost entirely gone. I could no longer read the Bible. I could no longer pray aloud. I was experiencing exactly what my father had gone through, what my great-grandmother had faced. The Hernandez family curse was completing itself in me. December 12th arrived. It was early morning, around 3 o'clock, when I felt an irresistible urge to go to the chapel. I couldn't see, I could barely speak, but something greater than my will pulled me out of bed. I left the house like a blind man, stumbling on the cobblestones, guiding myself only by memory and an inner force I didn't understand. When I reached the chapel, the door was ajar, as if someone knew I was coming. I crawled inside, because my legs could no longer support my weight. The stone floor scraped my knees through my pants, and I felt the blood flow, but I continued. I had to reach her. When I finally touched the feet of the image, all the rage, all the hatred, all the arrogance of 15 years crashed down on me, like an avalanche. I saw clearly, even though I was blind, the depth of my wickedness. It wasn't just about religion or theology. It was about power, about ego, about the sick need to be right at the expense of other people's peace. Forgive me, I whispered with the last thread of voice I had left. Forgive my pride. Forgive my hatred. Forgive the desecration I committed not only against your image, but against the sincere faith of so many people. It was then that the miracle happened. I felt a warm tear fall on my forehead. I opened my eyes, and even though I was blind, I could see a soft light emanating from the image. The Virgin Mary was weeping, but this time they were crystalline tears, tears of compassion. I felt her hands touch my face, a feeling of warmth and peace I had never experienced before. Rise, my son. I heard her voice, clear as a bell. Rise, my son. And then, a merciful darkness enveloped me. I woke up 3 days later, in the hospital of the neighboring town. Dr. Ramirez was by my side, with an expression of utter bewilderment. Pastor Elias, I don't understand what happened. Your eyes are completely healed. There aren't even any scars from the bleeding you had for weeks. Your vocal cords, which were severely inflamed, are now perfect. But I knew that the physical healing was only the smallest part of the miracle. Something fundamental had changed within me. The hatred had been ripped from my heart like a malignant tumor. For the first time in years, I felt genuine peace. I no longer needed to be right about everything. I no longer needed to prove others wrong to validate my own faith. Joseph Mendoza visited me at the hospital the next day. "How are you feeling, Pastor?" he asked, with a knowing smile. "Different," I replied honestly. "Completely different." I looked at his calloused hands, at his kind eyes, and for the first time, I could see in him not an ignorant idolater, but a man of genuine faith. "Joseph, you said I was the last of the lineage. What does that mean?" "It means you broke the cycle," he replied. "Your children, if you have any, will no longer carry this burden. The Hernandez family curse ended with you, but now a new story begins." When I left the hospital a week later, I didn't go home. I couldn't return to the same life, to the same church, to the same ministry based on attacking the faith of others. Carmen had returned from her sister's house where she had been staying, but our marriage was irreparably damaged, not because of her, but because I had become a completely different person. "I understand," she said when I explained that I couldn't continue as a pastor. "Actually, I always knew this would happen someday. You were walking towards a cliff for years." She hugged me, and in that embrace, I felt the forgiveness of yet another person I had hurt with my arrogance. I closed the church. I returned the hall rental. I sold our few possessions, and with the money, I bought a bus ticket to southern Mexico, to Chiapas, where I had read about an orphanage run by the Guadalupan sisters. I didn't know exactly why I wanted to go there, but I felt it was the right place. When I arrived at the Casa de la Esperanza orphanage, I was greeted by Sister Concepcion, a 50-year-old woman with the kindest face I had ever seen. "I need to work," I told her. "I don't have any special skills, but I have hands and willingness." "We always need help," she replied. "But tell me, why does a man your age want to work in an orphanage in the middle of nowhere?" I told her my story, the whole truth, including the sacrilege I had committed, and the miracle I had experienced. She listened to me in silence, without judgment, only with a compassion that reminded me of the Virgin Mary's gaze in the chapel. "Welcome home, Elias," she said simply. That was 5 years ago. Since then, I have worked every day taking care of orphan children. I help in the kitchen, clean the dormitories, teach the older children to read and write. I am no longer a pastor. I don't preach to anyone, but I have found a way to serve God that I had never known before, serving the most needy without expecting recognition. The children call me Uncle Elias, and some of the youngest, when they are scared or sick, ask me to tell stories. I never tell biblical stories like I used to. I tell stories about forgiveness, about second chances, about how sometimes we need to completely break down to discover who we really are. Every night before going to sleep, I pray the rosary that Joseph gave me. Yes, I, who spent 15 years attacking this prayer, now pray it daily. And with each Hail Mary, I remember that true faith doesn't need to destroy the faith of others to validate itself. True faith manifests itself in love, service, and humility. On December 12th each year, I accompany the sisters and the children to the celebration of the Virgin Mary at the small-town church. I see in people's faces the same sincere devotion that I used to scorn in St. Michael, but now I understand that those faces reflect not idolatry, but hope. And who am I to scorn someone's hope? Carmen came to visit me last year. She remarried to a good man who makes her happy. "You seem at peace," she told me. "You finally seem like the man I met 20 years ago, before pride consumed you." She was right. I found the peace I had lost, not when I started preaching against others, but when I learned to serve in silence. The greatest irony of my life is that I discovered my true vocation only when I completely lost the voice I thought was my greatest gift.
Joseph Mendoza died 2 years ago. Before he left, he made one last visit to the orphanage. You fulfilled your purpose, Elias, he told me, holding my hands with his even more aged hands. The Hernandez lineage is now a lineage of service, not of hatred. Today, as I tell this story, I am 53 years old. My hair is gray, my hands are calloused from work, my heart is at peace for the first time in decades. I don't have a congregation, I don't have a pulpit, I don't have recognition, but I have something I never had when I was a pastor. I have the certainty that I am exactly where God wants me to be. The children of the orphanage are my congregation now. Their laughter is my hymn, their needs are my sermons, their unconditional love is my theology. I've learned that God speaks far more through the embrace of an orphan child than through fiery speeches against the faith of others. I still dream of the Virgin Mary sometimes, but now she doesn't weep blood. She smiles, with that maternal smile that promises everything will be all right, that every journey of pain can transform into a journey of healing, that every heart hardened by hate can be softened by grace. If there's one message I'd like to leave for those listening to this story, it's this: it's never too late to start over. No matter how deeply you've fallen, how great your mistake, how hardened your heart, mercy is greater than any sin, forgiveness is stronger than any hate, and humility can transform even the proudest of hearts. Today, when I look at the image of the Virgin Mary in the orphanage chapel, I no longer see a threat to my faith. I see a mother who never gave up on her rebellious son, who waited patiently until he was ready to receive forgiveness. I see the face of grace that reached me when I least deserved it, that healed me when I needed it most, that transformed me when I finally surrendered. The Hernandez family carried hate for nearly 5 centuries, but today, that same family carries love, and that makes all the difference in the world. This is my story, this is my redemption, and if it can touch your heart, if it can plant a seed of hope in your soul, then it was worth every tear of blood, every nightmare, every moment of despair I lived through, because sometimes God needs to break us completely to rebuild us the way He always intended. Thanks to the Virgin Mary, thanks to undeserved forgiveness, thanks to a second chance I never thought I deserved. My name is Elias Hernandez, and this is living proof that it's never too late for a new story to begin.